Press. So it's my hugest pleasure to introduce Hee Suk Jung, someone who is, let's give a huge hand, because just by, I don't think ever in history a president of America's meeting has been so productive for the country, because just by meeting them, they raised their investments from 30 to 52 billion. So, President created $22 billion in value just by a half-an-hour meeting. And he will be interviewed today by someone who we consider to be the most well-connected corporate venture capital attorney in Silicon Valley. He didn't say that, then we wouldn't have said that. And we were inviting other CVCs, and I reached out to corporate venture capitalists from Allstate Ventures. He said, gosh, I can't come, but Louis is a rock star. So that's a client endorsement. So it's a great pleasure to meet such a leader and ultimate connector also, who will make sure you get the highest level of CVC wisdom possible in the world at this point in time and space. So on that note, I hand over the floor to Louis.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Casey, and thank you, Hee, for coming. Just to warm up the audience a little bit, because we're first in the morning. I think it would be terrific if we could see if everybody who's an entrepreneur could stand up, so we know who's in the room. All right. All right. Give yourselves a round of applause. Awesome. Thank you for being here. Those of you who are not in the Silicon Valley, flew here or took a train or drove a very long way, please stand up. Thank you for being here. All right. All right. Welcome. Awesome. And any investors in the room, please stand up. Any investors? Okay. That's good to know. And you're welcome, founders. Now you know who you're looking for. Okay, shall we sit down? Sure. Hee, thank you so much for joining, and it's an honor to be here with you. I think when you first came to Silicon Valley, you had a mandate to do big things. And you right away identified Bloom Energy as a company you and SK wanted to be involved with, and I was very honored to work with you on that deal. And you've gone on to do great things. Just to kick us off, tell us a little bit about your background, something that nobody knows.
All right. First of all, thank you for having me here. My name is Hee, also known as Jake, which is my Starbucks name. Not many people quickly understand my Korean name, and I get make fun of many times, so I just go by Jake when I go to Starbucks. So I do have a longer first name. It's Hee Suk, but they always say Hee Suk, and I don't suck, so I just go by Hee, but I also say Jake. I lead the investment arm of SK from Silicon Valley, and just a little bit of background of myself and SK. I was born and raised in Korea, but at the age of 16, I must have done something terribly wrong, because I was sent to a boarding school in India. I didn't speak any English, I didn't speak any Hindi, but my parents decided to send me to India for boarding school. And for many years after that, I was thinking so hard, what was the punishment for being sent to a boarding school in a country that I've never been? And now that I look back, I think it wasn't punishment, but it was full of opportunities. Opportunity of having friends in 40 different countries, opportunity to enhance my global minds and grow my survival skills. And I think that's what got me here, being able to speak in front of a fine audience of you people. And of course, SK quickly picked up on that. And ever since I joined SK 15 years ago, I worked in many different countries for the past 11 years. And I was always at the forefront of looking for new business model, growth opportunities, expansion opportunities, and always I have to be the first one smashing my head onto the bare ground. So that's my experience with SK. Getting into SK transition, SK has a lot of brands within the company. We have about 180 operating companies, but not many people know about us, especially here in the United States, because we don't have that brand recognition like other Korean companies. But SK is the second largest company. We do contribute about 14 to 15% of national GDP. Those 180 operating companies are being managed by 2 holding companies, and I work for SK Discovery, which is one of the holding companies, which means we also have number of operating companies within, and they basically fall under 3 major verticals. One is oil and gas. We have a gas company, we have a power company, power plants, chemical plants, and we basically produce power to the economy, but we are trying to transition from an oil and gas company into an energy company, making investments into electrification of everything and hydrogen economy. Second vertical is pharmaceutical and bioscience. We make medicines and vaccines. And third vertical being the real estate arm. We build multifamily high-rise apartments, commercial buildings, office buildings, and we are getting into warehouse businesses too. And we are starting to look into the fourth vertical, which is the deep tech, including metaverse, Web3, cryptocurrency, blockchain, and by far the prop tech area is a very interesting area where all the technologies are coming together into one place, where we can put digital health solutions into prop techs, we can put clean tech, or we can put legal tech, fintech, everything onto prop tech, and we are trying to marry that with digital assets. So we are looking into metaverse and Web3 solutions to connect it between the physical and digital world, and that's what we do.
He, thanks for the overview. What made you decide to come to Silicon Valley?
Okay, we didn't talk about this question, but I will take it. We actually evaluated many different countries and places within the United States. We looked at San Diego, we looked at Boston, New York, and Silicon Valley too. And we came to Silicon Valley because this was about 60% of capital goes through Silicon Valley. And about the other 35% from New York and 5% other places. So we knew that a lot of startups that populates from different countries also come to US, especially to Silicon Valley, to get funded. So we wanted to be at the heart of innovation. And of course, we started, I think the first office that we established here was about 13 or 14 years ago. And ever since then, we've been getting a lot of traction from different startups. And we knew that this was a place to be. So we decided to open more offices here. And I think we have now a total 6 offices in Silicon Valley, and we are still expanding into different states. Yep.
Wow. Thank you, He. When is the right time for a startup to come and approach you? Do you take startups at formation? Are you interested in seed? Are you interested in late stage? Tell us when is the right time for SK.
SK is boringly very strategic investors. We are not looking for much of a financial returns. I mean, of course, there's no good investment if you lose your money, but we are looking for strategic fits. And when we need to be able to evaluate those companies, they need to have some sort of a product or services that has been proven in the market. So our sweet spot of investments will be post the Series A all the way to pre-IPO companies. And we tend to write a check between 1 and 50 million for those startups, depending on their stages. But we also make public company investments. If they have a very good strategic fit with us, then we will make billion-dollar checks to make the bonding between the companies, and we will definitely take them to different geographic countries to expand their businesses. And if the companies are ready to go to international market, I think that's what we welcome the most. And I think we can add a lot more value when the company is ready to go to international market.
So I think you said you are a strategic investor rather than a financial investor, and that's a big distinction in the world of corporate venture capital. There are some groups who are investing a pool of money, and they don't take orders from their business units, and they invest completely independently. But I think what he told us is that he invests strategically for the SK Group, meaning it's not about the financial return, it's about how your business can accelerate SK's business. And I'm curious, if you have any examples of collaborations between your portfolio companies that you have invested in and the SK Group, because I think one of the big attractions to me to corporate venture capital has always been the ability to accelerate a startup and drop it into the sales channel and be the validated customer. How is that going, proving out the strategic fit?
Great question. For SK, and I think it applies to all the other strategic investors, what they're looking for is a good technology or a good solution that we can better serve our customers. And in that regards, what we can do or how we can add value to startups is to become their business partners, business developers into a country that you've never been. And we have that domain experts in different countries, and we can help you with policies or regulations, penetrating into new markets, and you can actually find the right partners to get into a new market by getting investments from the right CVC. And that's where we add the value the most. And for example, we talked about Bloom Energy. When we first acquainted back in 2016 or 15, until we make that investment, there were years of reviewing and making sure that we are going to be working together. So we went through that honeymoon period, and after we made the investment, we quickly transitioned into expanding into different countries. And eventually now we built a factory for them in Korea, and we are being the hub of their expansion point for Asian market, and that's how we help startups, being able to help them grow their business by providing test beds and also financing their projects, putting money into their equity investments, and also becoming their business partners in different countries.
Wow, how lucky they were, Bloom, to find you. Next question I wanted to ask you, is, what is the hardest part about your job as a corporate venture capitalist?
This is an easy one because I talk about it almost every day. Educating the management is the toughest job. Because I am looking at you, I'm talking to you, I'm meeting with you, I'm learning these new technologies, and back in Korea, they don't get to do this every day, where I have to educate them, and they're talking about power plants, and I'm talking about distributed energy resource management, and there's a big gap in between. How do I get to the terms from power plant? So I gotta go to distributed energy resources, demand response, energy efficiency, virtual power plants, and so these steps takes a long time, and educating the management, and then after that, I gotta go start educating the government. So those education part and also educating the public is very difficult job of myself. And after that education has happened and I am working, or I'm trying to work with one of the best companies in those value chain, then rather making investment itself is rather the easier process for me.
That's super interesting. So he has a hard job, I think I heard, where he's got to bring executives from Korea here to the United States to have them meet you, and maybe he's got to have you go to Korea.
Yep.
And I think the last 3 years, that must have been very hard with COVID. How has COVID impacted your ability to invest over the last 3 years?
There's pros and cons. Before COVID, I actually actively invited our government to come over to Silicon Valley, and I will take them to different tours of meeting with different startups. So they get to see, talk to startups, and they can learn new technologies. It's been working out fantastic. But after COVID happened, first thing, I was so happy not to see any of my management. And we always do Zoom calls, and I don't have to wear my dress pants, I can wear my shorts, and it was so much comfortable in terms of working, but investment definitely slowed us down because of, cutting on the budgets, and, a lot of startups started to have difficult times. It was also an opportunity for us to make the right investments, because those startups who survived through COVID-19, we were so certain to be able to be a strong backer of those companies, and we became even stickier to those companies. So COVID-19 has changed also the way of working. So now we are very comfortable using Zooms, and we don't have to travel all the time, even though meeting in person is very important and very impactful. But I think it's just changed a lot, but also same time, nothing has changed.
Being a strategic investor, do you feel like your job is to find the technologies and bring them up, or are you kind of given a roadmap of technologies to find and executing a top-down strategy? Is it top-down or bottoms-up?
We do both. We have to do both. So on one hand, before we start making investments, one of the hardest jobs of myself is making the market landscape. I'm not taking the market landscape from PitchBook, or I'm not taking a market landscape from CB Insights. I need to make my own that fits into Korean and Asian market. And once I draw that value chain, I gotta find what technologies that we need. And once we find those technologies, who are the best in those industries? And that's how we start to make investments to integrate the whole value chain. So that's bottom up, that I'm convincing my management. On the other hand, we're also doing top down, because there is a way, especially we're doing a lot of investments into ESG. And what we drive the most right now is social value. And in 2 or 3 years' time, everything that we see here, it's going to have carbon tax, how much carbon it's producing in the process of producing these goods. How can we make this into another stock market? So we are looking at social values now. So that kind of top-down gives us a big direction, but the detailed and defined investments we do bottom-up. And we also educate our management very much that there's no startups that meets our 100% of satisfaction level. We have to work together to get there. So that's also a part that we do a lot of bottom-up conversations.
Thanks, Hee. We're going to open it up to questions soon, but one more that I had is, how does the current environment impact your thinking about investing? And where I'm going with that is, we've seen a significant correction in the public markets. The stock market is off something like 25% from the high, which somehow qualifies as a bear market. And through the year, we've seen that trickle down first into late stage, then into middle stage. And I have seen post Labor Day that it is trickling down into seed stage for everyone in this room. And from what I see as a lawyer advising startups from garage to global, is that there are just as many deals happening, and everybody is investing just as often, but they're writing smaller checks, or they're investing certainly at lower valuations with more investor-friendly terms. But what do you see, and how does it impact you and SK?
Right now, most of the startups, when things were good, they were trying to get runway of 12 to 18 months. But it quickly changed to 18 to 24 months. But now many CEOs are looking at over 30 months of runway that they want to be able to have in their bank account, and which means startup CEOs are becoming more humble, I think. And they need more funding, and they need a good partner to sustain their business. So from the investment perspective, we think that now is the right time to start engaging with the startups. We know that next year will be about the similar level of economy, and we've been saving our cash, and that's how we were able to make commitment to Mr. Joe Biden of putting in another $52 billion into U.S. for the next 7 years to create more jobs here. And we are building gigafactories here. We are going to build bioscience centers. We are going to build innovation hub down in San Jose. We are going to do more investments into infrastructure to have a bigger platform. And we are going to put more money into application solutions to put it on top of the platform. So I think investment-wise, right now, till another 12 months will be the right time to engage with the right startups. And those startups who survive through this next 12 to 18 months will become even stronger. And all the great startups that we saw before, they were created during this pandemic and difficult times. So.
I'm going to ask you one more last question, and then Axel, if there are questions in the audience you want to start harvesting, or Casey, please do. Last night we heard from Vish Mishra, the mayor of Silicon Valley, that our startup founders in the room should not be afraid and should pick up the phone and call and ask other founders for help, ask investors directly for investment. And I think that's good advice to be brave. But I also think that you need good advisors and people in your network that can make warm introductions. What's the best way for a startup to get connected to you, And just to restate what he said, I think he said there are 3 large verticals that he's going after. First is anything in the energy supply chain. Second is anything in health and life sciences. And the third is deep tech, which is metaverse, prop tech and prop tech. So assuming you're in one of those verticals, what's the best way to get connected? Should people wait for you to call them, or is there a way that you prefer to be introduced?
When I first got here and when I met with Louis for the first time back then, I was doing a lot of outbound sourcing. And right now, I have more than enough inbound deals that I get, and I don't even get to review all of them. All my team members are reviewing those deals, and they only bring up that I might be interested in. But best way to contact with me will be through LinkedIn. Ask me to be connected with you, send me LinkedIn messages, and I do check my mails, and I do check my LinkedIn messages. I may take more than 24 hours to get back to you, but I do check my messages. So I think best way to reach out to me will be LinkedIn messages. And then once we get connected via email, that's when we can really start to arrange for calls and maybe meet in person in the Bay Area.
Thank you, Do we have questions from the audience?
We have run out of time, but I'm always about shameless plug for our core members of our ecosystem. So we have a company here, EarthGrid. Founder started Unicorn before, and he also raised 19 million, and we feel he's better than Elon Musk's boring company because he's using plasma to drill tunnel and replace overhead wires which create all the fires. So please spend after this few minutes with Troy, and let's all give a huge hand for raising the bar. Thank you. Now, once again, we are going to have a very path-breaking chat. We have a very seasoned CVC from Micron Technology, who has tremendous background in technology. She will be interviewed by this gentleman who I consider one of the Silicon Valley ultimate insiders. So it's my pleasure to introduce Gayatri Radhakrishnan of Micron Tech, and she will be interviewed by R. Paul Singh, long-term board member of TI and TICON, who is helping us connect with others, big name CVCs as well. He was part of 3 exits, 1 IPO, and also teaches in Northeastern and used to teach in UC Berkeley. So these are people who I first call, some people like Paul, if I want connection in any company. So on that note, Paul, floor is yours.
Thank you, Casey. Can everybody hear me all right? Seems like a little echo. Okay. So Gayatri, welcome.
Thank you.
So maybe you can tell people a little bit about your background, how you got into this field. And I also see that you actually studied in France for your MBA, which is, normally we don't see in Silicon Valley a whole lot. So
our conference,
if there is a story behind it, we'd love to hear it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to meet you, Paul. In terms of my background and how I got here, I have about 20 plus experience across multiple sort of disciplines, from product management, product marketing, strategy, M&A. I worked in an institutional venture fund in Germany, actually, and then also now doing corporate venture here. As to how I kind of got into venture, it's an interesting story. So,
of course.
One of my earliest, I worked at Corning, which was my first hardware sort of exposure. I used to be in the optics space for my master's, and then had the opportunity to move to Austin. And Austin, as you might know, has a very thriving startup ecosystem. Joined a startup, was doing product management and product marketing for them. And in the process, that was kind of my first exposure to venture capital. And we were going through this fundraise process. I don't know how many of you are young enough, let me put it that way, to remember VGA camera phones, the really small ones which took crappy pictures. We were a startup focused on that space. And some of the VCs basically said, oh, this is going to be taken care of, hardware will evolve, handsets will change. So we were looking at our business model, and at that time I was kind of curious about who are these people? How do they know the future? Do they have an 8-ball to predict what's going to happen? And that got me thinking about venture, basically. As I got more and more into sort of the business side of things, as an Indian, I'm sure most of you know that, we're all we have multiple degrees in engineering. So I do, at least. And so I was like, okay, more than the technology, I realized that I was intrigued by the process of commercialization. How did technology become successful? So combine that with the venture experience, I realized that I wanted to go more into the business side of things. And my husband was asked to move to Germany at that time, and I said, you know what, I've done my undergrad in India, did my grad school here in the US, why not do my MBA now in France, I guess. So that, frankly, the short reason is I didn't want to spend, I'd done enough degrees, I didn't want to spend 2 more years getting an MBA. I was looking for a short 1-year program. INSEAD had that. They're literally a 10-month program with a 2-month optional internship, depending on when you join. So that's kind of how I did my MBA in INSEAD, but that also gave me the opportunity. I did an internship at 3i back in the day when they had a venture arm, and I really enjoyed that 2 months of meeting entrepreneurs, people who are smarter than me, who are trying to solve real problems, and that got me intrigued. And so post my MBA, I ended up joining Early Bird Venture Capital, a German fund. So that's kind of how I got into venture. So
before joining Micron, you were part of this impact investments. So, I mean, that's not something more common that most people see. So what was the focus there? Or was it really an impact investment, or was it just a name?
So interestingly, the fund was called Impact Venture Partners. They picked the name before impact investing started being associated with social impact. So, but their notion was impact in all forms of life, like startups have an impact. So that was kind of how it happened. Yeah.
So I think most people probably know what Micron does, but it will probably be a good idea for you to give a elevator pitch for what Micron really does, so people can relate to why Micron investments.
Absolutely. I think we live in Silicon Valley, but I've been surprised by how many people don't know us, a silicon company, probably because we are headquartered in Boise, Idaho. Boise is also known for another kind of chip, potato chips, right? But we make silicon chips. We focus on memory and storage components, specifically DRAM and NAND. So pretty much every product that you use, electronic product you use, has some form of memory. I'm sure when you're buying it, you're looking at like how many RAMs, gigabytes of RAMs and storage that you look at. So that's what we do. We focus on sort of memory, storage, DRAM, NAND, and SSD products. That's our core areas.
So does that mean most of your investment focus tends to be on those areas, or have you kind of looking at investment as a financial vehicle more so than, strategic only?
It's a great question because we've evolved over time. So historically, Micron has been investing in startups for 20 plus years, but it was very much in the strategic lens. So where we felt it was, I joke that when we talk about strategic investing, sometimes it tends to be more tactical than strategic because it's more near term, right? Oh, can this startup give me access to a technology today? Can this startup give me access to a new market segment or go to market today? That was kind of the nature of it, but in late 2018, we announced a $100 million AI fund, so focused on several themes. I'll talk about that as well. And we are fully deployed from the fund one. And in June of this year, we announced a $200 million deep tech fund. So in terms of focus, we focus on 4 broad domains. From Industry 4.0, we also look at mobility, so anything from ground to space. For instance, we have invested in a company called Volocopter that does vertical takeoff and landing. We have invested in the intersection of technology and healthcare, so AI applied in healthcare or computational biology, things like that. We also have what we call Better Planet. So we look at sustainability and agriculture as a theme under that domain. And finally, from a horizontal standpoint, as a company that's involved in producing memory and storage components, we look at anything that touches the compute architecture, including current and future. So anything from quantum computing to, interconnect technology in the data center or edge networking, all of those are par for course, and we also look at anything to do with semiconductor related stuff. Could be semiconductor packaging, things like that. So
when you say Industry 4.0, can you sort of elaborate what it means to you, and then where have you done any investments so we kind of understand where that is?
Absolutely. So we look at manufacturing technologies broadly, so AI and machine learning or deep tech applied in those segments. Couple of investments we've done in the space. One is a company called Drishti. So Drishti is focused on sort of labor productivity. The founder once told me, we are kind of like spell check, but for manual labor, right? And it's kind of stuck to me. The idea is when I was surprised by how much manual labor still exists in the manufacturing world. So the idea that every sort of manufacturing line will have a camera, and the camera basically tells you, oh, you've missed this step in an assembly process, for instance. So why is that important? It reduces your cycle time. If you made an error, you're catching it beforehand, so your yield is good. It's also used for training purposes. And also, they've created this almost video repository. You can do searches on your video to identify certain anomalies. So why was this line taking longer for production? Why was there a delay? So you can go back and look and review. So that's one example. We actually have a contract with them as well. So we've been talking about using that technology in-house. Another one is a company called HoloOne. You can also think of them as an enterprise AR use case. So in a time where Zoom, we were just talking about Zoom in the previous panel, travel was restricted, people couldn't get to places. But when you think of a manufacturing floor, if a machine breaks down and you have to get it fixed and no one's able to travel, that means that machine downtime leads to yield loss, right? So we are also customers of this company as well. We leverage them for remote assistance. So by using the technology, the expert doesn't need to be on your manufacturing floor. They can remotely guide you in terms of how to fix your problem. It is also used for standard operating procedures. For instance, here are the 5 steps that you need to do. Again, training use cases. So things like that. They're also being used for construction. So before something happens, you can kind of visualize what the completed product would look like, and you can say, oh, this wiring duct has been placed in the wrong place. So we have this thing called shift left where we catch errors, before they've moved down the process. So it allows us to catch those mistakes. Building a fab apparently costs billions of dollars, so we don't want to have those kind of issues. So those are all some examples.
So do you tend to write the first check or just follow-on investment, Series A, Series B? Where is your sweet spot?
So our sweet spot is Series A, Series B. I just did a seed investment, and then we also were a founding investor in one of the companies that we've invested in. So, but I would say sweet spot's more Series A, Series B. When it comes to lead versus follow, for instance, the Hollow One example that I gave, we actually led the round. So it's not that we cannot lead, but we are very selective. We're a very small team. So we are very cautious about, which companies that we want to lead in, and there needs to be a very clear view for us internally on how can we be a value-added investor if you're going to lead their round. What is that something unique and differentiated that we can bring to the table to be able to lead the round? That's something that we look for.
So I think there is I was just reading some article about how, so many Web3 investments that A16Z was leading, and suddenly they put a stop to it and all that, which doesn't surprise me because they overdid it. So what's kind of your take on Web3 and, all of the metaverse type of investments? Do you still see that viable? And if so, what is it that you are looking for in those investments?
So if you think of Web3 and metaverse, it's such a broad scope. It can become a catch-all, right? So we try to step away from that a little bit and look at the real pain point that these companies are trying to solve. We just did a seed investment in a company. It's not announced yet, so I'll hold off. But the notion's always around, okay, what is the problem, right? So we try to peel back the buzz and hype around a certain space and look at what is the problem they're solving. This has, historically helped us because then we avoid the hype cycles as well. Because if there's no real need, for instance, Hollow One, now they're calling themselves Enterprise AR or even Enterprise Metaverse. When we led the round, there were a lot of VCs who basically said, we don't want to do augmented reality. We've been bitten by that bug before, and it was not a good thing. And we looked at it and we said, okay, this company is solving a real problem. We have customers, they have other corporates who are investors as well, and we said, clearly there is an enterprise use case where this makes sense.
Yep.
And so that's kind of how we looked at it, as opposed to thinking of this as, it's a metaverse deal or a Web3 deal.
Yeah, I think sometimes those labels get people inside the door, so that's why they tend to use or overuse.
It's good for marketing.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, I think, but at the end of the day, I think companies have always been built with the same focus that they're going to be built in the future, which is, you got to look for your customer, you got to look for the use case and the pain point you're solving. And
right.
But it seems like when there is too much capital, people tend to forget that is still the core of the business, right? Because I keep hearing, oh my God, now we have to talk about how financing is so down and, there is a gloom and doom in Silicon Valley. I mean, I experienced 2001 with my startup, and, I don't think people know what a gloom and doom is. If you had not been at 2001, you have no idea what gloom and doom looks like.
I'm sad to say I've experienced it, but so I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, people have no idea what that is looking like. But anyway, so since I know it is kind of mandatory to talk about gloom and doom in the Valley these days, so tell us what's the, do you really feel that there is indeed slowdown, and if so, why? Because your fund is your fund. You have certain lifetime in which you're going to invest, so why does it change anything?
Let me rephrase that, right? Instead of thinking about it as gloom and doom, I feel like things are returning to normal. When COVID happened, everything went off kilter, right? As the previous panelist mentioned, initially a lot of companies, VCs, paused their investments, said they were going to focus on portfolio. But then everyone was stuck in their house, couldn't travel, couldn't do anything. So things went into overdrive. They realized that they could do deals over Zoom, and there was like a deal fever almost. There was too much FOMO. Every deal, everyone looked at every deal. So prices went up, there was too much money in the market. And so I felt like the traditional, August is a slow month, or, nothing happens during Christmas time. All of that went out the window. There was just deal fever throughout. I felt like I was working harder than most startups do, which was very crazy, because you're like, what's going on? Something's off here, right? But I feel like now it's returned back to normal. Maybe, yes, there is some amount of pullback as well, because pendulum always swings to one side before it corrects. So I wouldn't say it's gloom and doom necessarily. I think good deals are still getting done, but I think the process is definitely taking longer. I think because it's almost the opposite of FOMO in my mind. Before, there was this fear of missing out. Now people are comfortable saying, I'm okay to stay out of this deal. So that means that getting around together is taking longer. So for instance, when I mentioned that we don't lead all the time, we're seeing that lead term sheets taking longer now. So even if we are ready to write a check, for the company to find that lead investor who's writing the term sheet is taking longer, because I think there is definitely some level of correction happening also from a portfolio standpoint. VCs are slowing down to see, okay, how much of a correction is going to happen in my own portfolio? How much reserves do I need to have before they go out and deploy more fresh capital? So yes, I think there is definitely a slowdown, but we're also comparing that slowdown versus the hectic pace of 2020 and 2020, especially late 2020 and 2021. So all the reports say that, as mentioned earlier, valuations have not gone down as much when you compare to like the 2019 levels.
Yeah.
So I think all of that will change. I will start getting nervous, and we were just talking a few days ago with a group of VCs. When you see terms that are not standard start creeping up, that's when you know things are bad. But again, how much is just market correction and how much is just, now it's an investor's time as opposed to, founder time?
Yeah, so I think we saw that in 2001, but I think there is one principle that I think my friend Vish Mishra always says is a good company always get funded. It's just, it may be a little bit harder than otherwise. You may have to prove few more places, but in the end, a good company will always get funded. So, I mean, there is plenty of dry powder in the capital, right? There is so much money sitting on the fence and all the funds that were raised. They have to invest somewhere, right?
I have my thoughts on that as well, but I'll hold off on.
Yeah, no, we'd love to hear that.
Yes, I think one thing to keep in mind is a lot of these funds announced their rounds, but they've been deploying before the funds have fully closed.
Yep.
The minute they have their first close, they start deploying. There's usually a delay between, or a lag between, when a fund gets announced and when it gets deployed. So I don't know how accurate the data is. It really comes down to the level of recession we are going to see. There is definitely it is in the works. So what does this mean? When you have institutional LPs or corporate LPs, there could be LP defaults when you make a capital call. So I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think everyone's watching the purse at this point. So it's not all, in my mind at least, it's as startups, it was said before, watch your burn. I think it's good practice. It needs to be done in good time and bad. Whatever you can do to stretch your runway so you're in a better negotiating position is always a good thing. And as I said, when things look bad, but you have customer traction, you'll always get funding. Let me put it that way, as opposed to talking about dry powder. I mean, the real metrics always matter. If you're showing consistent growth, if you're showing a solid sales pipeline, then there's always going to be interest from VCs.
So I know that in the last, Pitch Global event, I saw a lot of companies in the healthcare space. And you mentioned that you are also investing in that space. So could you talk a little bit about what is kind of your thesis, where if any entrepreneur here from the healthcare is interested, then they can, say, okay, let me have a meeting of the minds.
No, absolutely. As I said, we look at anything that's data intensive, AI, machine learning applied in healthcare. So one of the startups we invested in is a company called Iterative Health. What they do is basically AI and machine learning applied towards colonoscopy, so they, in real time, can detect polyps. So the idea is things like colon cancer can be fixed or, addressed if caught earlier, if detected earlier. So when you're doing it, if you miss a polyp and it turns out to be malignant, then it becomes harder if you didn't catch it, because typical cycles are like 5-year cycles. So the idea of catching those sooner is really important. And they just got FDA clearance as well. And they've also been working with pharma companies in terms of areas like IBD. Inflammatory bowel diseases and so on, which was very interesting. I looked at sort of AI machine learning applied in radiology and sort of, x-rays and all of the, pathology and areas like that. But I found this very fascinating because something very tangible and usable today. And I didn't see a lot of companies tackling the problem. So I found it to be very differentiated. We are looking at sort of novel drug discovery approaches because, as you know, the drug discovery cycle is pretty long. We also look at sort of any kind of technology applied, any kind meaning, also from a healthcare maintenance standpoint, right? So you have chronic conditions like diabetes. We have invested in a company called Day2 that, without taking medicine, just by precision nutrition, every body is different. They tell you based on the microbiome and other biomarkers what kind of food you need to take so that you can manage your diabetes or prevent getting diabetes if you're already a pre-diabetic. So again, it's a huge saving for big companies as well because it's one of their expenses, but also from a lifestyle standpoint, you're not, so for me, I joke to people that I'm a high carb, high fat person, not healthy at all. If someone came and told me you cannot have your carbs, period, because you're diabetic, the chances of me adhering to those diets are going to be very minimal. But if somebody told me, you know what, have your oatmeal, but have it with, almonds or something to neutralize for your own body type, the chances that I'll adhere to those protocols are much higher. And they've actually shown tangible reduction in their blood glucose A1C levels. So
that's very good. So I think in closing, because we're running out of time, I'm going to ask you the question that if you were to create a startup today, you have to be an entrepreneur today, what would you create?
There are so many areas where I feel like there's big potential. And since we were just talking about healthcare, maybe that's one I'll talk about. I feel like healthcare is one area, due to various reasons, where they have not embrace technology as much. Now there's much better sort of exposure, much better access. But the one place where I agree with the importance of data privacy when it comes to healthcare, but I also think there's so much data that's getting lost that can be used for training models and so on. So how can you ethically have anonymized data that can actually be solved, that can be used to solve sort of health conditions? That's something, or sort of we talk about predictive maintenance and so on for machinery. Can we do something like that for people, right? A family member just lost someone, and in retrospect, this morning as I was driving here, she was telling me for the last 10 days he complained about these things, but he's a doctor. So she didn't take it seriously, and then he dies of a massive heart attack. And things like that, you say, oh my God, it could have been prevented, right? Those are areas where I'm like, what about predictive maintenance for us? What about a digital twin for the human body, right? But just a thought.
Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, no more room for question, but I want to just make a comment. To do that on a massive scale, we may need private partnership, and State of CA and all who are our backers could be very interested.
And pleasure to be with you, Deborah. And one, as an opening question, what do you think about Pitch Global and Casey's efforts for entrepreneurs?
I've known Casey for a long time. We've met years ago. And I think Casey is one of the most plugged-in people I know. So he knows everybody. Look at the people in this room. So, you know, there are a lot of organizations that have pitches. I've done a few others this year and spoken on stage at other events, but Casey just knows people.
Yeah, I agree. He's a force of nature.
Yeah.
It's terrific.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, have some of the corporate VCs pulled back? Is it as much, and if so, is it as much as, you know, around 2000 or post 2000? You know, or I don't know what you see.
Yeah, it's a weird dynamic. All VCs have pulled back to some extent, although they're still investing, as was said a few minutes ago. But what we've seen is that there are corporates that are forming VC arms that never had them before. Like blue-collar companies. Stanley Black & Decker has a new VC arm. Goodyear has a VC arm. I think JetBlue is here, right? There's some of the airlines have VC arms, some of the rental car companies. You know, these are additions to the CVC world that never would have been players in this world in the past, and now they are. So I think in some ways it's growing.
Okay, yeah, it is. That's fascinating. And on the financial VC side, do you think that the financial VC sides have I don't know, stopped investing since Q1, or maybe just reduced, or?
I haven't stopped at all, but it's interesting. I asked this question of somebody I was having lunch with, an early stage financial investor, and he said what was happening is when the public markets are down and very volatile, it makes the growth stage investors nervous. When the growth stage investors are nervous, it sort of trickles down, and then the early stage investors get nervous, even though they probably shouldn't be, because this is probably a good time to, you know, do seed and A-round investing, so you can have some runway to build up a good company. And so a lot of the early stage guys are still investing quite a lot. One of the big financial VCs said, and I guess he said this publicly, so I'll just say who it was. It was Sequoia. They said they're telling their companies to conserve cash, have more runway, as was said a few minutes ago. But then he said, but we were telling them that before the pandemic. It's just good business. So
yeah, they're smart people. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And well, here's something that's really difficult to tell is, do you think the number of startups have decreased, stayed the same, increased? Very hard to tell.
I think it's, so I work for IBM. I have relationships all over the world. And so I have a more global view of this. Maybe he has a very global view of this too, but a lot of people don't. And so I think it's increasing because you have startups every place. I've met startups from Somalia. I've met startups from the Sudan. I've met startups from Nepal. So if there are startup ecosystems, there aren't necessarily a lot of investors in those places, although I did just meet an investor from Mongolia. So there are startups in Mongolia, and there's an investor there as well. And so when you have that kind of global spread of this kind of ecosystem, yes, it's increasing, I think. I haven't done research to count, but my gut is that it's increasing.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I think that's very hard to do research. I did hear one data point.
Because they don't count the guys in Mongolia, right?
You know, even in Silicon Valley. I mean, let's see, Larry Sonsini, this is pre-COVID, said he'd heard one report that in the Bay Area there's 40,000 startups. I mean, that's a huge number, you know. I
believe it.
I would think, I'm not sure it's decreased at all, you know. I mean,
I don't think it has.
Yes, you make a good point, yeah. How about spaces? You know, there's software, SaaS, bio, deep tech hardware. Do you think equally impacted, or maybe it's more based on burn rate, or?
They're not equally impacted. We've seen investment in fintech decline overall, although, you know, some of the sectors within fintech have increased. Some of you really have to look at subsegments. Like in data, there were tons of NoSQL companies being formed, and I don't think we need any more new ones, but now everybody's worried about data lakehouses and you know, how the information is processed and how you deploy machine learning models and how you make them transparent and ethical and so forth. And so there, within sectors, there are things that are hot and there are things that are not. Biotech overall is kind of down, but for telehealth and telemedicine, it's up.
Okay.
So, and deep tech is very hot now. It's not just, things like, well, it's not just Web3 things, it's semiconductors, and it's biotech, it's new materials, it's the next generation of manufacturing and so forth. So, there's a lot of new things being done with drones and robotics and so forth. So there are a number of deep tech investors who are really active, and I'll tell you, I have some new colleagues, because they're new in the company, who are investing in and building up, more modernizing our hardware business, our systems and the infrastructure business. And it was not that hard for me to find some deep tech, hardware, semi-storage investors in Silicon Valley. We all think of everybody as investing in software, and that's to a large extent true, but that doesn't mean there isn't other stuff happening.
Okay, yeah. In fact, I think I met he at a semiconductor pitch.
Yeah, I think I met him a year ago too at some kind of panel thing.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. I guess at some point we might want to have questions, but any other important trends that you see,
I think it's interesting. One of the reasons our executives like to come out to Silicon Valley and meet people here and meet startups and meet VCs is that it's for executives at a very large corporation with big enterprise clients, it's a little bit of a mysterious world for them. They can read TechCrunch and they can get newsletters and they can get a market map from PitchBook, but it's not the same as actually sitting down and talking to people. And so besides investing and besides pulling in startups for M&A or for alliances, one of the things that we get out of this community and from the relationships is just an understanding of what's going on in the world. What are the new markets? What are the new trends? Where's the money going and why? Why did these guys invest in this stuff but not in that stuff? Because that's very illustrative too, right? If you passed on certain deals, why did you pass? And so we try to, I'm out and about, but I also take our executives out and about too, and clients too. I'm taking a big client around next week. So when you can hear firsthand why investors are doing what they do, whether it's a CVC, and next week I'll be with one CVC and two financial investors, so we get a little bit of a mix. It's important for the strategy of a group like SK or a big tech company like IBM to understand what's going on out there and why, and to look at the trends, because when you're in your own house and you're building your own products, you have certain tactical goals. You're being measured week by week, quarter by quarter, and the VCs and the startups are looking out. And so, we're way more than 100 years old now, and we want to live for many, many more decades as a corporation, and you can't do that if you're not looking at the future.
Yeah, and a lot of this stuff isn't, there's some stuff in writing and print, but a lot of it is from in-person interaction. That's where
you get a very different picture of things when you talk to people. You really do.
Yeah, and that's what's great. That
you have to do both. You do the research. You read the things. You look stuff up. I get, I'm on all the best mailing lists. I get like probably 40 emails a day summarizing something. Some of them are not in my space at all. I get emails about phosphorus because I don't know why. I met somebody at a conference, but I skim most of them, and it's different than talking to people.
Yeah, I try to prepare, but you never know what people are going to say, and to prepare to ask good questions in person. I mean, that's where you get.
And what I'll say is, we were in the last talk, we were discussing Zoom and WebEx and what that meant. For me, it meant I could keep up with my friends in Germany and France and the UK and the venture world without getting on a plane, but I missed having lunch with them.
Yes.
And, I've known you for a long time.
Yeah.
And here we are. And we ran into each other a month or so ago at a different event.
Yeah.
Right. And so the fact that things are opening up, every meeting I've had in the last couple of months, all summer actually, have been in person.
Yeah.
And I like people. It's just different.
Yeah, it's a great, maybe we're wired to want that, but I mean, how do you build trust otherwise? I mean,
Well, when this first happened, I went around to my contacts in the VC world and asked, are you still doing deals? If you're doing deals, are you doing them only with people you already know? And at first, I won't name names, but there was one large top-tier firm in Silicon Valley that just stopped. They were focusing on their existing portfolio. They didn't make a single investment for months. Others continued to make investments, but they only did it with people they knew, or deals that were in flight. They had met the people before, and now they could conclude the deal, not over lunch, but over Zoom. And then there are others who just got into it. They just got used to it. So they learned to, get to know somebody in a different manner. You don't know them in the same way as when you've had a meal together or spent time, but they made it work. They did. And now it's more common. It's much more common.
Yeah. In that sense, it was good. One of our startups, because everybody was saying during the pandemic, it's okay to just reach out by Zoom and you can go global and to investors. And so they talked to a couple of hundred investors, and there was traction from 3. They were all people they already knew.
Yeah.
So.
Just before the pandemic, I spoke at Slush, which is a conference that has 20,000 people at it. And somebody saw me speak there, and he's with The Next Web, which is an even bigger conference every year in Amsterdam. And he wanted me to speak at The Next Web. And then, of course, it was canceled. It was June 2020, it was canceled. And so I did speak at The Next Web in the winter on a Zoom. And the panel was fine, but it was really boring. I didn't meet anybody.
Yeah.
Right? I met 2 people who were on the panel, and the moderator who was with Financial Times, because FT bought them. So that was interesting, but you just can't make these connections. One of the reasons we go out and about is to meet new people and keep up with old connections like you.
Yeah.
And, you just can't do it on Zoom.
Absolutely. I agree.
So it works okay for point-to-point, one-on-one get-togethers. You discuss, you get a briefing from a startup, you talk to a VC and do a catch-up. It's not okay for events. It's really not.
Yeah. I wonder if anyone has any questions.
Casey, do we have time for one question?
Time for one question.
Go ahead.
In the last couple of years, companies that raise money raising very high valuations. Now they're facing down rounds that they need money. Is that an opportunity for CVC?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's harder to price the rounds. People don't necessarily agree on what the price of the round should be. It's an opportunity for most investors to get into a deal. It's not a good opportunity for the people who are already in the deal, and it's very difficult. We've had difficulty getting founders to get it, that they're just going to have to swallow that because that's the way the market is. They don't believe it of themselves. They see it in the market. They can read the news that we read, but it's like, it's not about me. And so, there has to be a come to Jesus discussion, basically.
Great. Yeah, difficult for sure. So, all right, Casey, are we?
Yeah, I think we've reached the end of this segment, but these are people, once again, they have just not showed up one time. We have deep links with them. They are integral members of our community. So get to know them and get to know get to know what they are looking for, and they'll also look out for what you're looking for. So on that note, thank you for such illuminating, present conversation. Thank you. Gonna introduce the host of the last session here, then we all go downstairs, have a break, and we'll have few more sessions downstairs so that people can still see the demo room. When I first met this gentleman, I thought he's a health tech domain expert, investor, thought leader, but to my surprise, he turned out to be a lawyer. And I never had in my life met a health tech, a lawyer who knows so much about health tech. And he now works for Norton Rose Fulbright, one of the leading law firms in the world, probably second or third largest, if not the number one. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Jason Nowak, and he will host a chat with another great health tech leader who was also formerly with Novartis DRX Fund. He was with Takeda Ventures, and he's connected to some large Japanese life sciences and other CVCs. So Jason, floor is yours, brother.
Thank you. Pleasure. You want that one? Yeah. Sounds good. Great. Well, I'll definitely be sure to tip you afterward. I really appreciate that introduction. It's totally inaccurate, but thanks very much anyway. Well, allow me the pleasure to introduce you to a really, really good friend of mine, Thomas Clues, who Casey gave a good intro to, but it only touches the surface of what Thomas has been involved in the investor community, both from the traditional VC as well as the CVC side. So Thomas, take it away for a little bit of an introduction.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Jason. My name is Thomas Clues. You can call me Tom. I've been doing venture capital investing on behalf of financial sponsors and corporates for about 15 years now. Started my career at a financial VC called Adams Street Partners. I was doing a mix of private equity, growth equity, and early stage venture, both in healthcare and tech. And to give you sort of the accelerated version of my background, after doing venture capital, I co-founded a company. I sold the company to a large corporate called Zeiss Meditech. This was in the bio-optic space. So I got my operational chops, if you will, and then have done corporate venture since. So I was with a fund that was co-founded between Qualcomm and Novartis called DRX Capital. Takeda took over the Qualcomm portion of the fund when Qualcomm divested its healthcare assets. And then, very recently, as in the last year and a half, I've been the managing partner of NGK NTK Ventures. A lot of folks don't know who NGK NTK is. We've been, it's an 80-year-old company, been making spark plugs for the last 80 years. And then, 20 years after they started making spark plugs, they realized that they could juice their gross margins by making the ceramic material that goes into the spark plug. And for those of you kind of, engineers out there, when you get into the ceramics business, you can do a lot more than spark plugs. And so they actually created a piezoelectric sensor business, which is called NTK. NTK is the material science of the business. And they invented an oxygen sensor that they've sold into the automotive space for the last 60 years. And they are, as public information, they're #1 in market share. They own about 50% plus of the market in automotive. And then about 3-4 years ago, they made a bold leap into healthcare by acquiring a oxygen concentrator business, right? So going from oxygen sensors to concentrators is not a stretch. It's a critical part of the oxygen concentrator. And in the last 2 years, they brought folks like myself on, my colleague Dirk Schappler, who is our Chief Innovation Officer. He's a 10-year pharmaceutical exec. He ran digital ventures for Bayer for a while. And he started this initiative to create a $1 billion plus venture fund. So we have, it's, again, public information here. NGK NTK produces about $1.8 billion in free cash flow every year. And the board decided that, the time to diversify the revenue is there's no time like the present, right? The electric vehicle movement is happening. It's real. ICE is becoming a smaller and smaller bite. And we want to diversify. So my mandate globally is to invest capital in the healthcare space, digital health more specifically, mobility, so to sort of dovetail off of all the access we have in the mobility space, and then also the clean tech sector, right? So NGK NTK is very adamant about sustainable energy creation, and we see that as a really interesting adjacency to what's happening in EVs. So that's our mandate. So.
That's awesome. I actually learned something about somebody I've known for 5 years, so that's thanks a lot. So today we're going to talk about trends in investing in life sciences, and I'm going to expand that to include healthcare as well. And obviously it's only a part of what Tom does, but Tom has been in the digital health space, precision medicine space for years now as well. And so we want to talk a little bit about that. And as we know, we talk about trends, often we talk about trends in these industries. We're talking about those emerging technologies. And obviously over the last 5 years or so, precision medicine and digital health has started to really take off. Now, what's driving that is similar for both. Obviously, there's the ability to sequence a lot cheaper than we've ever had. It's driven precision medicine. There's the technological advancements in AI and machine learning that allow for more efficient and effective data analytics for clinical insights, which is what is driving digital health as well as precision medicine. And then we have COVID. And obviously, that has had an impact in terms of from an investment perspective or focus. And what at least I observed, and I bet Tom would agree, is a glut of startup companies entering this space over the last 3 to 4 years and having to navigate that. So now we're post-COVID, and those glut of companies are still there, but the dollars aren't as available. So from your perspective, what do you see in terms of the trajectory of sectors like digital health going forward in this current climate of the next probably 18 months to 2 years?
Sure. Yeah, it's really interesting. COVID, again, global pandemic definitely had its impacts, really unfortunate circumstances, but it did validate a lot of things in digital health. Unfortunately, due to hype cycle, we saw a froth of valuations during the pandemic. And again, venture capital, a lot of venture capital, I would, hate to say this, is flock mentality, right? So a lot of traditional VCs and corporate VCs tend to flock around trends. And so I think that froth in valuation terrified a lot of folks, because those that got exits out of the froth are pretty happy right now, so they have cash. But a lot of folks invested capital during the froth, and so it's caused a little bit of a retreat in some of the capital piece. So I think the biggest trend is, traditional VCs are likely to kind of slow down a little bit. I think we're seeing just from a macroeconomic trend, we're seeing a massive downturn in traditional venture capital. But I think this is an opportunity, and I say this somewhat selfishly, this is an opportunity for corporate venture to shine, right? So I think it's, for lack of a better word, it's a buyer's market, right? So if you have capital, right? And so because we are not tied to institutional LPs, we haven't really been impacted by that sort of liquidity. Our LPs are not saying, hey, we don't want you calling capital over the next quarter, the following quarter, right? Our LP is actually telling us to deploy more money, right? So I think that's the biggest, I would say, shift in mentality, right? CVCs are playing a more instrumental role in funding companies.
So with that sort of change of momentum and maybe a lot more of attention directed towards CVCs in terms of startups approaching, and maybe the deal flow starts to grow very quickly, how is your assessment of those companies going to change, if at all, given going through this period and being a buyer's market, from that perspective, because there are so many similarities in a lot of these companies and in what you see on the surface, and during a time where there is more money available, you could take some more shots, but now where there may be some more circumspectness necessary, maybe not necessarily for CVCs, but I venture to guess there would be. How would you view sort of the assessment protocols changing now?
Yeah, I think assessment protocols are assessment protocols. I think they're going to stay the same. I would say the quickness to decision making for traditional VCs is likely going to be restricted a little bit. Now we're seeing that with our portfolio right now. So we've got about 8 portfolio companies since we established the fund. And for those that have been approaching traditional VCs for their next round of financing, we're just not seeing that same click through. Right? I think traditional VCs are focusing more on the portfolio companies they do have. That's always going to be a priority, right? A venture capitalist portfolio companies are their children, so to speak, right? So they're going to make sure the kids are taken care of before they seek other external investment opportunities. And so I would say assessments will stay the same. It just may be from an entrepreneurial perspective, or I put that hat on for a moment. They may see not as many returned emails, right? There may be some follow-ups to say, we're not looking at new investments for the time being, right? That's the feedback I've gotten from my CEOs, right? But I think the assessment protocols, speaking from a corporate venture capital perspective, our assessment protocol, I would say, is still to our core, strategically guided, right? We're financially oriented. We're very motivated by financial returns. So we see an abundance of deal flow from that perspective. I think we're seeing companies willing to take lower valuations for capital. As a result, we're just having to triage a little bit more. So I think that what's really happening is our core assessment protocol staying the same, but our top of funnel management is becoming a little bit more triage oriented. If that makes sense?
Yep. That's interesting, and I want to dive into sort of some of the diligence pieces on the data side with some of these companies in a second, but I want to sort of pull back and sort of shift into life sciences just for a little bit and talk about precision medicine. Now, some of the drivers of precision medicine success over these years have been similar to digital health, right? The technological advancements in AI machine learning, the ability to apply that technology to genomic data, which is a perfect match for that. And so that's driven a lot of the trajectory and growth of that space. I don't get the sense that COVID necessarily had as drastic an impact on the momentum like digital health, because there's some necessity there with digital health. But I mean, I guess the same question to you about precision medicine and those types of companion diagnostics and clinical decision support tools and things like that are coming out of precision medicine. Where do you view as the trajectory for that in terms of from an investor perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, within the healthcare space, we can talk about my mandate for just a second, and then I'll answer the question. We're focused on 3 different buckets. One is aging in place. So we're really looking, Japan has an aging population, and we're seeing the same trend here in the US. So we're really focused on, chronic care management, early disease detection, and wound care, which is a very specific mandate that we have for the aging population. And within that, we're seeing chronic care management solutions for cardiac and diabetes, and et cetera, et cetera. And so where we're seeing I would say the use cases for precision medicine are not so much in the upstream data mining side or the sort of the genomic side. Where we're seeing the trend is on the application specific pieces, right? So a lot of our companies are looking at applications to use data-driven decision making, right? So, we've got a portfolio company called Neoplas, which is a wound care therapeutic, and we're looking at ways to enhance the software that powers the device to create a more precise therapeutic, right? So for whatever reason, the device doesn't work on 70% of the population. We want to understand why. Right? And that's what we're seeing for AliveCor as well. AliveCor is a company that I've been invested in for 6 years, a big fan of the company. They just closed the financing with GE that we sort of co-led, and it's exciting, right? I think precision medicine is how do we remain opportunistic about data aggregation, right? So we've got millions and millions and millions of EKGs. What else can we concatenate to that to enable or empower a more seamless virtual care experience in a precise manner? So those are the, generally speaking, those are the trends we're seeing.
Yeah, and that's interesting you bring up the application space, which we've talked about this before ourselves. I'm interested in your thoughts about this. Is with this, I guess, is ties COVID back to precision medicine. Is with the pandemic, there has been issues with abuse, particularly in pain medication, opiates, and all of that. And we're seeing a lot of the litigation come down because of this. How much do you think that's going to drive interest in investing in areas that deal with those sorts of issues from a precision medicine standpoint?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. There's a lot of stuff in the press lately about the federal government really ramping up legal expenses to folks who contributed to the opioid pandemic, right? And there's a swath of documentaries that sort of give you the overview about certain pharmaceutical companies that contributed to it. But what's interesting now is we're seeing that impact downstream, right? Even to the retail pharmacy side. And so, because we own a large oxygen concentrator business, we have taken a very deep interest in the respiratory care space. And so this has really sort of unlocked call it a new pillar for our investment thesis, which is around how do you create novel delivery methods for drugs in the respiratory care space. And so that's an area where we're just dipping our toes in for the time being, but it's all of these things that we're seeing with drug use, medication adherence, and medication abuse really has piqued our interest from the standpoint of we need to do something here. At the end of the day, we are a very patient-focused investment thesis. That's our guiding light, and we recognize that abuse is neither good for the patient or the entire ecosystem around it, right?
Yep, absolutely. So I want to tie both precision medicine and digital health to diligence, and that's from the perspective of data. For many, many years, obviously, data and sources of data and how data is used and applied hasn't been necessarily part of the general dialogue. Now with these emerging technologies really utilizing data a lot, how much diligence, and this is something near and dear to my heart in terms of diligence around the data, where the data is coming from, the rights and informed consents, the data rights that have been acquired by the companies you're invested in, whether or not that data has been used for the proper purposes. Maybe data was acquired under a research use only, but now you're trying to spin it into commercial use. And how much diligence has been going on? Is that a shortfall that investors have to start thinking about more so, because that's going to be a way in which you separate the wheat from the chaff when it comes to investing?
Yeah, I mean, no, it's a great question, right? So there's people a lot smarter than me that can help me sort of diligence some of the legal implications of that, right? So the last thing you want to do is find out that the company doesn't own the data that you're betting on, so to speak, right? And so I think I would say that legal diligence hasn't changed as much on the legal front, right? We still want to dig in and understand and make sure that the company has a very robust data set, and that chain of ownership is clean, right? Or if there are issues, what are those issues, and what are the mitigation factors to those risks, right? And let's make sure we keep the company operational long term. But what I think has changed recently is this concept of AI, right? So AI has sort of become table stakes, and I think architectures are table stakes now. There's a lot of existing architectures out there.
It's off the shelf at this point.
Absolutely, and what do you need? You need data to power some of that AI. So I would say a recent trend in some of the diligence I'm doing is evaluating the uniqueness of the data, right? Which kind of gets into patentability of AI, which again, I'm not smart enough to understand. This is what guys like you kind of provide to us, right, and give us insights on. But at the end of the day, I think it's what type of data is this company collecting, and how unique is it in terms of the use case that they're trying to capitalize on, right?
And then by extension, obviously the heterogeneity or the diversity of that data is becoming a very big concern, and obviously for investors as well, because you want to have data that is diverse and could be applicable across many races as well.
100%. Yeah, it's really trying to understand the roadmap, right? Where's the company headed? What sort of unique use cases are they pursuing? And look, where are the gaps in the data today, like you just said, right? So again, I think the best entrepreneurs I know fall on the sword, and they say, look, we have great data here, but where we really need to focus on is collecting data in these key areas, and this will really take us to the moon, right? So it's really important to understand what those gaps are, and ensure the company remains well capitalized in pursuit of those data applications.
Well, Tom, I really appreciate your insights. This has been informative for me. Every time we sit down and talk to each other, this is sort of how we talk at a bar, by the way. But every time I sit down with Tom, I always learn something. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Right.
Instead of taking questions, we'll do something little different. So please stay there. Okay. We have here, among all our companies presented, we have two companies here. One is a spin-out of Mass General, and the other, they were invested by Mayo Clinic. So Mass General, Durvina, we want to please come here and give a 1-minute elevator pitch. He's trying to bring Mass General to our event during JP Morgan. Okay. And we have more than one company funded by Mayo Clinic, so we'll try to do that as well. So 1 minute. Okay. You know that. If you exceed, we won't do anything.
Thanks a lot, Casey, and sorry to repeat some of this for the folks who have been here, but yeah, I'm commercializing a novel technology that was incubated at Mass General Hospital. It's a photochemical process to modify tissue properties. So the same way that polymers get cross-linked and they get stiffer, we can cross-link tissue and make it stiffer with this photochemical process. Very quick, easy to implement, takes about 7 minutes, and we increase this tissue strength 5x. We're looking at kind of the aging population with vein graft procedures. So in this country, 1 million patients a year get CABG, peripheral artery disease, or AV fistula surgeries, get a vein repurposed to transport arterial blood, but the 1-year failure rates are almost 20%, 5-year failure rates are 50%. So we've got great preclinical data, 5 different publications showing we reduce the biomarker for this by 70% plus. And we're excited to improve the outcomes for these patients and these surgeries. Add value to the patients, to the hospital system, and the payers as well.
And why you?
And why you? Okay. So I've been in this industry for 30 years, in mostly the cardiovascular and orthopedic space. I've done about 7, 8 different startups, a couple IPOs, multiple exits, $1.25 billion of investor returns.
All right. Okay. We'll get the private feedback in private. And the next company, they just got invested by Mayo Clinic, and really excited. Both of them are our serial presenters. So welcome. She has come from Utah.
Hello, I'm Vicky Farrar. I assume that you, like all of us, are scared to go to the hospital. You should be. Hospital-acquired infections, a huge international problem, annually $50 billion, 100,000 deaths. Most of these are never events, they should never happen. We have the solution with no antibiotic resistance. We're using visible light, that's light that the human eye can see, delivered via fiber optic in an off-the-shelf catheter to disinfect that catheter, thereby preventing infection. More than 40% of all hospital-acquired infections are caused by catheters. Like I said, we have the solution. We have 28 issued patents, 18 pending, written freedom to operate opinions, investment from Mayo Clinic, Merit, Docs at Kaiser, etc. We are going to transform the way the world prevents infection. Antibiotic apocalypse, game over. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I think that sums it up. And thank you for being here. And yeah, we'll talk on Monday. And let's make the biggest event, JP Morgan. In our last in-person JP Morgan event, we had Nobel laureate Dr. Thomas Sudoff of Stanford Medicine, Sanofi board member as a keynote. So we already have some reputation.